Welcome to the Parrhesia Tapes, a podcast about whistleblowers and whistleblowing. My name is Natasha Lovell and I'm from the whistleblowers charity Parrhesia. I'm a campaigner for the rights of women and I'm co-hosting this series alongside Martin Bright. Martin is a journalist that's supported many whistleblowers in breaking their stories, and he's the editor-at-large at Index on Censorship.
Thanks, Natasha. And our expert today is Samantha Prosser, who's a managing associate at BDBF Employment Law. Samantha's advised a number of whistleblowers in the National Health Service over the years.
And finally, most importantly, we have our whistleblower for today, Sue Allison. During her time as a diagnostic radiographer, she realised that breast cancer diagnoses were consistently being missed by the head of department within the NHS Morecambe Bay Trust. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you.
Would you be able to describe the moment that you realised that breast cancer diagnoses were being consistently missed, not just on one occasion, but on a vast scale?
Well, Natasha, I think probably the most defining point for me was having a lady who was in my in the room where I was doing assessments, and she was a lady who'd been sent by her GP. And this is the symptomatic part of the breast service, in that if a lady goes to their GP with a lump or something abnormal that she feels needs to be looked at, then she'll be referred through to the clinic, and she will see somebody and have further tests and further x-rays and an ultrasound scan. So this lady had come to the clinic and she had a reasonable size cancer, sort of the size of a large pea or something like that, which is a good size. And after we'd gone through the imaging and had done a biopsy and whatever, she said to me, surely this is the same area that the consultant looked at when I was called back from breast screening, and that was only about 6 or 7 months ago. And she said, it is, isn't it? It's the same place that she was looking in. And, you know, there was a kind of a silence in the room, because I knew very well from looking at the previous x-rays that she was entirely right. And that was a cancer that had been missed by this particular member of our department, who was a senior radiologist.
And that puts you in a really awkward position, doesn't it? Because you're kind of having to cover for someone else's mistake that was 6 months down the line, which realistically could have massively altered the treatment that she received.
Yes, it did. And I think that obviously what it could mean is that she might have more radical treatment. Depending on how much her cancer has grown, there's obviously more areas that need to be excised by surgery, or more intensive types of follow-up treatment like radiotherapy and things like that. This is why the whole idea of the breast screening service is to diagnose things very early, so that they can be treated relatively simply and a patient can have a full and happy life afterwards.
So it took away those options for her and from you, realistically.
Yes, it put me in a very difficult position, and the fact of the matter was that this wasn't the first time this has happened. This was a recurring thing that quite a lot of people, radiographers and radiologists who worked in the department, knew that this person's practice was not up to standard, and that there were far too many patients being missed.
Can I just come in at that moment and just ask you about not just the moment that you realised something so serious was going wrong that you felt that you must do something about it, but what processes then went through your head between that moment and the moment that you blew the whistle? What is it that then makes you someone that steps forward?
I think probably what happened was that I actually discussed the situation with other colleagues, but just the ones that I trusted, that, you know, I felt would not sort of take this any further. And I knew that they also had concerns about the practice. And in actual fact, at the same time, without me knowing about it, another radiologist in the department had been doing some audits on missed cancers. So this is something that obviously is really important part of the work that you do in an environment like that, is actually checking how correct you've been when you've diagnosed a cancer. So that's right through from looking at the screening mammograms and deciding whether you think there's something abnormal, through to actually doing a biopsy and having a look what the result of the biopsy is. And that's obviously the confirmation that the diagnostic procedure is working properly, and that your standard of work is as it should be, so that people don't get missed. Now, she was doing audits which were showing that this person had a lot more misses in various parts of the process. Not only was she was sending people away with small cancers and telling them that there was nothing wrong with them. That's after something had been highlighted in the breast screening round in the process of reading the images. So it's not as if she didn't have a pointer there where other members of staff had said, I think this is abnormal. But her skills, her ultrasound skills and her biopsy skills were also not really up to a high enough standard to make sure that the proper result was achieved.
So it sounds like she was actively ignoring other people within the department. How did you feel when you realised that you weren't the only one that was having to deliver this devastating news to people, that actually the cancer that they thought they might have had over 6 months ago actually was still there and that it had been misdiagnosed?
I think that there's quite a lot of staff, because of the power and the sort of personality of this person, who was the head of the department, was the director of breast screening and also the director of core clinical services. So, being on the board and, the fact that she was in such a powerful position meant that a lot of people were more inclined to turn a blind eye and not say anything at all. And just think, well, there's a lot of that goes on in the NHS where people think, oh, I'll let somebody else say something, I'll let somebody else do something. But it wasn't something that sat easily with me. I couldn't, after a certain period of time, I thought, well, I'm going to have to do something about this. So the first thing I did was to find out what the policy was on raising concerns about somebody's practice, and to try and do everything exactly how it should be done. And it was around that point that I was warned very, very much by another radiologist. It wasn't a warning. He wasn't telling me not to do it. He was warning me of what the outcome would be. And he said to me, you'll lose your job.
What did you think? Did you think, well, that can't be true? There's this policy in place. I've read the policy. I know what the procedure is. Surely this is the right thing to do.
Yes, and I think that's exactly what I did feel. Is I just thought, well, obviously, if you follow the rules that are in place to protect patients and whatever, surely all that can happen here is that somebody who is high enough up and understands the clinical side of what's happening will take this person on one side and say, look, you're going to have to go and be retrained, or you're going to have to step back from your clinical work and just concentrate on the managerial side of what you do, which would have been fine. Because it would have taken that danger away from the patients. And as far as I could see, I didn't see that there should be any problem with that. But I knew that one of the things that we're often told in the NHS is that staff who aren't medical staff who don't have as high up roles or are not as high up in the hierarchy of the NHS should be able to say to somebody in a higher up position, look, I've noticed that you're not doing what you should do for these patients, or your procedures aren't quite right, or you don't wash your hands before you examine a patient, or a perfect example is what happens in the operating theatre, where quite often operating theatre staff find it very difficult to actually be strong enough to say, are you sure that's the right leg, or that's the, is this the patient that we think it is? We should recheck. And of course, this is how these terrible mistakes happen.
Could I maybe at this point just very briefly bring Samantha in? Because I'd be really interested in whether it's your experience that Sue's experience is quite common, in that people in good faith think that they're entering into the correct whistleblowing procedure, only to find at a later date that this isn't the case.
Yes, I think it is depressingly familiar, I'm afraid. I do have to take a step back. I'm an employment lawyer. I don't see when people raise concerns and they're acted upon and the relationship carries on. So bearing that in mind, I see the worst end of employment law. But from my experience, the frequency that I see these kind of issues happening, when someone blows the whistle and they are targeted rather than someone looking at the issue itself. The frequency, when I speak to my clients, when they can name 3 or 4 other people that's happened to them within the same trust, to me, it does seem that there is a systemic issue within the NHS with whistleblowing. As Sue mentioned, there is the freedom to speak up. It was brought in following reviews years ago. Each trust is meant to have a freedom to speak up guardian that you can go to, that can be trusted to look into this issue. I don't think in all of the cases that I've dealt with that the freedom to speak up guardian has ever actually played a part or an active involvement in the case.
That's amazing, isn't it? I mean, were you surprised at what subsequently happened? Maybe you could take us through that moment again where you realise, oh, this was supposed to be a relatively straightforward procedure, but actually I'm being targeted now.
So what happened was there was no freedom to speak up guardian at that time, because they weren't introduced until I think it was 2015, and this was sort of 2012. But the policy stated that you should raise any concerns with your manager. So I did. And I could see that she was extremely uncomfortable with this. She obviously was aware that this person's practice perhaps wasn't as good as it should be. And she said, right, well, I'll do whatever I need to do here and to report it on. And in actual fact, she came back to me and said that I needed to speak to one of the HR business partners. Now, I happen to know that this HR business partner was a very close, confidant, if you like. She was very, very close to the person who I was raising the concerns about. So obviously the manager had passed the buck and thought, right, well, I'm just going to count myself out of this unpleasant situation, because I know that basically the shit will hit the fan, I think was what her words were. And I'm not sure I'm supposed to say that on here, but...
Say what you like.
But that's exactly what her response was, really. Oh, God, the shit's going to hit the fan now. And she said, I should have to speak to this business partner. And I thought, well, there's no way I'm going to speak to her because, they're just going to. I'd found out by now that, a lot of people had been pushed out of their jobs because they had challenged this person about practicing, and not in the breast screening unit, but in radiology in general, because across the board, her practice had been questionable, and there had been patients harmed. People had found that their jobs were terminated, and all sorts of bad things had been said about them, or cases against them have been concocted.
It's astounding. I think it's key for our listener to understand as well that you stayed within the trust for a long period of time. This is quite early on within your journey, is my understanding, but you stuck at it because obviously this is your career. But what was your experience of staying within that trust when you'd watched other people around you also try to raise these concerns, being pushed out, and the person that was at fault had no boss, had no consequences for her actions?
Well, it became very unpleasant indeed. Thereafter followed a number of years where there was a lot of insidious bullying, a lot of vilification, really, and a removal of any sort of entitlements to training or promotion or anything that one would hope that you would get if you were working hard in a department and trying to become the best that you could. So everything is removed and you become a no person, really. That's the first thing that happens, is that you become shunned. There were people within the department who said they didn't want to work with me because I was obviously a troublemaker, and the person that I'd raised the concerns about spread the suggestion about that me and my colleague, who'd also raised concerns, we were just very bitter people who were just very jealous of her. And as such, we could cause a great deal of detriment to the department if we were allowed to continue with this vendetta against her. In actual fact, all we were trying to do was to say, look, we've got a problem here. Can we just fix it? And then people won't be harmed anymore. And that could have happened so easily. But it didn't, because she refused to budge. And then she just set about destroying both of us and our careers.
The response is frankly school ground behaviour, being ostracised and being left out and being told that you're just bitter and that it's a personality issue when it's patients' lives. And I know from reading some of the reports, and it was something that I think is key to draw out as well, that two women's lives were lost because of this. At least. Yeah. How many do you reckon it would be?
I really have no idea, because this was kept it was closed down very well by the trust. And I was quite naive about this whole situation at the time, and so was my colleague. And we didn't have any other support of any sort. There is quite a lot of support out there for whistleblowers now, and whistleblowers in the NHS, which has been brought about by a number of well-documented cases, and people actually, having the whole situation out there so that people can see what's going on. But at this time, this was everything was. It was very easy for them to close it down, and because we wanted to keep our jobs and our careers, we were duty bound to not speak to the media, We would have been probably dismissed instantly had we shared with the media at all. And we didn't really know much about reporting things to the CQC or anything like that. We didn't know anything. We were just trying to do our jobs and our duty to the patients, really.
I was wondering on this issue of media and not being able to speak beyond the whistleblowing procedure that you'd read. Do you ever think now, well, maybe I should have just gone straight to the media, and maybe I should have just gone straight to the press, and this would have resolved itself more quickly?
I think all that would have happened is, as I've said, I would have lost my job. They are quite constructive in the way that they can move people out of a trust, and the ways that they do it. They can accuse you of misuse of the internet while you're at work or something like that. There was one consultant who the rumour went around that he was looking at porn on the internet or something like that, and he was marched out in the middle of the clinic. And this is something that I'm sure Samantha's come across, is the fact that quite often even consultants can be the security can come round and escort them off the premises as if they've murdered somebody or something like that. And this won't be anybody who's had concerns raised about them. This will be the person who's raised the concerns, which is really shocking to imagine.
This is not good practice, is it?
Far from it.
I was going to ask you, Samantha, about reporting to the media and whether you would ever recommend that. But clearly there's such a stranglehold here. You've got a monopoly in the NHS on healthcare to a great degree. And so these kinds of behaviours, I guess, are possible, but it seems to me as an ordinary person that this is extraordinary behaviour.
But it is. And when I first got into this line of work, I was really shocked. Call me naive. I've been in the employment world for a while. I thought I'd seen it all. But there's a level of vindictiveness to the behaviour that I've seen within my NHS cases. And Natasha, you said earlier about the sort of playground behaviour, and you can boil it down to that, but there's so much more at stake here with highly intelligent people involved, and it is astonishing the level that people will go to. The ostracisation of people, the subtle rumours going round, the use of datixes, which is a way of reporting concerns internally. They're often used as retaliation for raising concerns. As you said, people will see you as the black sheep, that you're marked. They don't want to be associated with you. So people will start distancing themselves from you, and then relationships break down. And that gives the trust, the employer, a really easy way in of saying, actually, it's not what you said. We encourage people to raise concerns. We want to hear about things. It's just the way you've said it and the way that you behave with your colleagues. That those relationships are broken down. That's what the issue is here. And they hide the core issue here. And all of this is a distraction from the real issue, which is the danger to patients. That's fundamentally what you do. You go into it. It's a vocation. People feel so passionately about what they do and to help people. And that all just gets missed when all of these other employment issues arise.
As a journalist, I would always want to say to people, well, come to us. In a democracy, surely it should be possible for people working in a publicly funded institution to use the media. But it sounds to me like, well, in fact, both of you seem to be saying that really would be an option that would lose you everything.
It's a high-risk strategy because you open up the door for the trust to say that in itself is an act of gross misconduct. And that is the reason why we're dismissing you, not because you've blown the whistle. And the other point to bear in mind is that the whistleblowing regime is set up, it's intended to encourage people to raise concerns internally so the employers themselves can look at issues and rectify it. And so most of the protection you're afforded as a whistleblower comes from when you blow the whistle internally. It is possible to blow the whistle to organisations outside your employer, but there are additional hurdles you then have to get across, to show that you've already raised it internally and your employer has just ignored you or not taken any steps, and that's why you need someone else to have a look at this. Or where it is exceptionally serious cases, and we're talking, international child abduction type cases, the bar is pretty high as to then to go outside of the organisation. And I think that's what's so frustrating from the clients that I've got, is that constant feeling like you're banging your head against a brick wall because you're doing everything right. You're doing as Sue did, read the policy, follow the policy, you're acting in good faith, and when that comes to backfire you, it's absolutely devastating.
And how does that differ in terms of the clients that you've had? Because I know that you support more than just NHS whistleblowers. Is there a specific culture that exists within the NHS? Obviously, we've talked about it being a vocation. How does that differ compared to other sectors?
I think the main difference I see is people within the NHS, Martin mentioned it, the NHS is a monopoly, so you don't have the option of just simply moving a job. Not every trust has the same services to be provided or at the same level. If you're a surgeon, for example, you have to be within a certain distance of the hospital for emergencies and so on. So you can't just easily move jobs. So you feel that you have to raise it internally, you have to go on that path. Whereas people in other sectors could easily say, I know what will happen if I raise the whistle, if I blow the whistle. I'll look at moving elsewhere. Some people compile that whole dossier of information and hand it over when they leave, because then they can live with their conscience, but they're not going to face the retaliation that follows it.
And to turn back to Sue, I think after hearing about your case, I'm sure we all kind of did a bit of a deep dive on the internet looking at the trust specifically, and I'm sure we're all the same conclusion. Am I right in saying that you're not the only whistleblower from within this trust? It seems like an endemic issue. I don't know.
It is an endemic issue, without a doubt. Obviously, I'm sure you've all heard of Peter Duffy, but Peter's been having the same sort of issues for the last decade, because what was happening with him in urology was pretty much about the same time as
maybe
what
it would be
happened
helpful
with
to
me.
take us through a little bit of what happened to him, because although we may be familiar with his story, I'm not sure all our listeners will be.
Peter is a consultant surgeon. Well, he's just retired actually. So, but he was working at Morecambe Bay. He was really keen to come back to the area where he came from. In the northwest, when he became a consultant urologist, and he came back and was very happy working in the trust until he started to find that he had colleagues who were just not taking their responsibilities seriously enough. So this would include things like not operating on people in a timely fashion, so that they had problems because they didn't get to the operating theatre when they should, not coming in when they were on call when a patient needed to be seen, and on occasions Peter had to go in instead because the ward sister would be ringing him up and saying, well, I can't get this other doctor to come in even though he's on call. He says he can't come in, or he's somewhere else and he can't get to the hospital. So Peter was finding that he was going round taking the lion's share of the work, and putting in so much more into that unit because he cared about the patients and he wanted them to be well and to recover, than a number of his colleagues who persistently, their practice was not up to the standard of the positions that they were holding. And one of them was sent away to be retrained, and then came back to the trust, and I believe was not really improved at all. There was a lot of politics going on inside the department, a lot of nasty sort of backbiting stuff, which ended up with Peter being accused of being a racist. He was actually, somebody reported him to the police that he was a racist, the local police, and they reported him to the GMC for, and he was completely bullied out of his role, really, in the same way that I was. And we both took the same route in that when things got really difficult at Lancaster, we both actually decided to move and work doing clinics at Furness General instead, which is, of course, about 40 miles away. So you're actually getting away from the people who are currently bullying you. But they don't let you get away with it for very long, They still sort of hound you and make sure that life is very unpleasant.
I mean, it sounds like there's a cultural problem there. I mean, if it's not just in one hospital but across the trust.
Yes.
And I'd be intrigued to ask you about the effect of a report that came out in 2015. So just looking at the timeline, you're raising your concerns in 2012. And then during this whole period, there's a mother and baby unit scandal that explodes within Morecambe Bay. I hope I'm getting the timeline right.
Yes.
And then the report comes out just as you are going through this process.
Yes.
Did you think, oh, well, that's it now? Of course, the whole world is now going to know about Morecambe Bay and the fact that this trust is a problem. Or did you just think, oh, well, this is just going to be another thing brushed under the carpet?
Well, this is it. Again, it's a very concerted effort to cover the worst of things up and to try and skew the data and to present things as being, there's been some mistakes made, but lessons learned and all that. And then they spent millions and millions on a new birth centre at Furness General, which is where the problems that arose. That made a lot of headlines because it was in that situation. It was the patient's relative. It was James Titcombe who took it to the media, which of course a person who's employed there isn't able to do in quite the same way. So they did set about making things right for James. So you can't make anything right when a baby's died, but they do have this way of looking after patients who have really dug deep into what's happened to their relative, and they want to know the truth and they want to find out what's happened. There's a kind of a feeling of things are very much on a need-to-know basis within the trust. So that means that different departments don't find out what's going on in other departments. And you do get a situation whereby when you've raised concerns like that, and when you're in this situation where you're being targeted from all angles, you don't feel like you want to open yourself up to anybody else, because you might get even more bad behaviour towards you, if you like. It didn't matter the fact that I'd gone down the correct route for actually raising the concerns, because I was subsequently blacklisted, so that I couldn't get another job anywhere in the NHS, and the same happened for Peter. So that's easy thing for them to do. They have quite a network within their HR services whereby they can share information about people, and it didn't matter how many interviews I went to, some of them where I was the only applicant, and others where I was the only applicant who had the necessary qualifications. And that's the sad situation about something like the breast service, is that there are so limited numbers of staff. There's very few breast radiologists, because it's not a particularly popular option. So they're very short of radiologists, and they're also very short of radiographers and advanced practitioners and consultant radiographers, who obviously are needed on a day-to-day basis to see on a patient.
When you search up NHS Morecambe Bay Trust, the first two options are jobs, and then the second one is scandal. And I think that's really key to know, the fact that the isolation that you experienced was paramount, and it was used so consistently across the trust in so many different areas to cover up issues with surgery, the maternity ward, and then the cancer ward. I don't know if there's any other whistleblowers within there, but it's astounding to me.
I'm intrigued to know, considering everything that you went through, I mean, this sounds like a terrible, well, I was going to say a terrible experience, but it's experience upon experience upon experience. So you do the right thing, you find yourself isolated, bullied, blacklisted. What do you think gave you the strength to carry on? Or were there moments when you thought, why on earth did I do this?
I think I'm quite a stubborn person.
Clearly.
I don't like being bullied. I came across, like everybody probably does at some point in their life at school, I came across people who would wish to bully you, and I didn't take kindly to it, so I just didn't allow it to happen. So I think in that respect, it became a battle of wills between me and this particular consultant, because she was like, well, I'm having you out of here. And I was like, no, I'm not going anywhere. And I made absolutely certain that my practice was absolutely spot on, that I didn't make any, everything I dotted my I's and crossed my T's and all the rest of it, and made sure that there wasn't anything that they could hold against me. They did try one Datex. It's not a Datex at Morecambe Bay, it's a Ulysses report, but it's the same thing. And
can you just explain a little bit for the uninitiated what these are?
Yes, a Datex or there are other types of systems working. These they're really important in NHS hospitals, because they're where people can write down when something went wrong. If an error was made with medication or anything really. I mean, we had an occasion where a lady tried to sit herself up on a trolley, and she didn't realise that she was actually lying right up to one end, and as she sat up, the whole thing tipped and she fell off the end of the trolley. But that's the sort of thing that really you need to learn from, to make sure that people don't do that again. I mean, she was fine, but it was quite worrying at the time. But anything should be reported on there so that it can be learnt from, and it's marked down. And then you have things right at the far end of the scale, which are called never events. Now, these are things whereby either a patient actually died, or they could have died, or some really serious harm could have come to them or actually did come to them. And these need to be logged. It's really important that they're logged. But what happens is that quite often when somebody's raised concerns, they suddenly find themselves inundated with these reports which are made against them. So somebody else in the department will say, oh, this person did this, or they reported this wrong, or they read that film wrong, or something like that. And sometimes it can be an absolute deluge, because the word goes out that, basically we're going to get this person and we'll make their job quite untenable, really, in that they don't want to be here anymore, and they'll try and push them out. I'm actually, I've got doctors within Morecambe Bay who I talk to on a regular basis, who are in that position now where they are being forced out of their roles. And they're hanging on in there, in the hope that some things might get better. But because they've said something which wasn't appreciated, and they've tried to do something to make things better, which was not appreciated, then they become persona non grata, and there is every effort made to make them feel like they can't continue in their role.
My clients often find that they just feel they've got a target on their back, and that someone is looking for any little thing to get at them, whether that's clinical, which is obviously far more concerning from their point of view, or behavioural, and you can use a datix for both of those issues. And the other way that they get caught on the hook as well is when these issues are raised, they're meant to be investigated, or grievances are raised against them. And they're then stuck in that position of, well, even if they could leave, they've got this unresolved concern that's been raised against them, and they're terrified that that is going to follow them to the next hospital, or if they don't respond to it, there's always going to be that question mark hanging over, or that assumption that they did do something wrong. And then they're caught in this horrible position of feeling like they need to defend themselves through these processes. And I don't know if you've had experience with grievances in the NHS, but they are phenomenally long. You can be talking a year to 18 months for some of these investigations to play out, whereas in other sectors you're talking weeks, if not a handful of months. And you're just kept in this limbo position where you can't move on until you've cleared your name, and you can't clear your name because it's being dragged on by management, and all this while all of these behaviours, actions are happening towards you, and that target is just getting bigger and bigger on your back.
So, Sue, what's mystifying to me here as an outsider is how people think they can get away with this behaviour, and I suppose even more so, what is motivating people to behave in this way? What is your analysis of what's going on here?
Well, I think a lot of the behaviour is self-serving. When it comes to senior managers within a trust, they achieve, they get a great deal of power. They obviously get paid very well. They want to keep their positions in the trust. And a lot of that hinges on whether they can make the trust look like it's bringing in a good level of income, and that, I think that's more important to them than being up there as having high safety standards and a good reputation for doing good surgery or whatever. I think most trusts are in competition with with each other, business-wise, and keeping that income generated is what keeps them in their positions on the board.
And what about the people around them? What about the people that are in more junior positions that are not speaking up like you did?
Well, they are the ones that are hopeful that they will be going up the promotional ladder, because they know it's a known fact that if you want to go up in the NHS, you do not rock the boat. They're not interested in people's opinions about how things could be made better or safer or whatever. All they want is yes men, really. They want people who will support whatever actions they take, regardless, without question. I think that's what you find. Not all NHS trusts, some are far better than others, but there are a lot of NHS trusts that work on that principle, that, you know, you need to keep your head down and support the board and support the trust. And it's quite interesting because I was listening to something that the chair said at one of our Council of Governors meeting, and he said, well, you shouldn't be on the Council of Governors if you don't trust the trust. Which I thought was quite an interesting thing to say, because, you know, the trust is completely untrustable at this time and has been for some
circular
time.
And
Exactly. So that's just saying, I don't want you on my Council of Governors unless you are completely committed to singing from our hymn sheet and supporting your board without any qualms whatsoever.
And for you as a whistleblower, the really terrifying thing must be those people that haven't spoken up, the sycophants around the senior management who then go for you. I've heard the term flying monkeys used. What does that mean?
Certainly that term could be used for what happened in my department. The consultant who we raised concerns about was not. She didn't like to actually do any direct bullying, particularly herself, but she certainly expected willing followers to take on that task for her, make sure that myself and my colleague were watched every minute of every day, in the hope that they could find something that they could bring us down with, or make some sort of incident out, or suggest that there was something in our personalities that was wrong or bad, or against the behavioural standard framework, as you know.
And these are like the flying monkeys from the Wizard of Oz, from the Wicked Witch.
Right? Yes. They're the sort of henchmen who go out and this particular consultant had a sidekick who was another consultant who was quite a willing person who also was, quite took on the role of bully without any thought at all. I mean, I can remember one occasion when I was actually undertaking some training, and I needed. Obviously, you have to, with clinical things, you have a logbook to fill in. You have to have a certain number of patients that you've seen for certain things, and then I was working alongside this consultant in the next consulting room, and between us we had, say, 20 patients. I happened to have a couple of patients who were quite complicated, so it took some more time. And she flew through most of the other patients, and then she told her healthcare assistant to go and bring the last patient from the waiting room, and the healthcare assistant said, "Well, don't you think we should let Sue have this one, because she needs it. She's trying to get the numbers in." And she said something to the effect of, "Nah, I don't think so." It was just a kind of case of, well, no, we're not going to show any sort of proper managerial responsibility in helping another person along in the department, and that was very much the attitude.
And what's your theory of what's going on here, Samantha?
I mean, it's so familiar with all the cases that I have. So I'm trying to think. Most of my cases involve someone who is very senior in the department, not necessarily a manager, but someone that may have been there the longest or more experienced than other people. And they see the department as their personal fiefdom for a variety of reasons, either because they're so senior, because they're, some cases they're protecting their private practice as well, which is linked to some of the issues I see. And they don't like to be challenged. And you're right to use the term henchman, because it forms this cycle of abuse that has been described by all parliamentary group when they're looking at the type of behaviours that come up time and time again when someone blows the whistle. And it is that getting everybody else on board to isolate that person, to target that person, to go around and say, well, if you've got any concerns, raise that datix, which they wouldn't ordinarily do to someone else. It's the demotion, denial of training opportunities. Sometimes it's raising clinical concerns, behavioural issues to force someone out, or it's just making life so painful for them that they're left to resign. They just can't take it anymore, and that's how I see this playing out time and time again.
It's a mob mentality, realistically, and I think what's so sad is that it seems as though it's an unspoken rule, but one that's expected, that there's, as you say, henchmen that come in and are there to make someone's life miserable. And I think what's more desperately sad, and it's so easy to forget, that this is in a department that's telling people the worst news possible, that they could have cancer, and you're the one that's having to deliver that news, on top of the fact that you have no support just from your members of staff, which for so many people it's another family, realistically, that you go to work and these are the people that you see day in and day out. I can't imagine what that must have been like for you.
It was very difficult indeed, and that's I after I'd put in my ET claim, that was 2018. So you can imagine how many years I'd just kept
this
fighting
is the
on.
employment tribunal, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the thing unfolded whereby after the original whistleblowing, there was a certain amount of bullying that built up over time. And that my colleague and I were constantly fighting against by putting in grievances against people and saying, you can't behave like this towards me. Those grievances were never properly gone through. They didn't go through the proper process. They'd allow it to just sit there for weeks on end. I have emails where I've said to the person who is in charge of my grievance, I haven't heard from you for 7 weeks. This is against the grievance policy. You should be dealing with this. What do you I was passed over for a promotion, which I was the only person in the department who could do the job. I had been doing the job already. Effectively, it was the only sensible alternative that I should take that role on, because we were so short-staffed for doing those particular skills within the department. But I was just completely ignored.
So despite the behaviour of everyone else within the trust, it sounds like you still continue to follow the book. You went through the grievance procedures and challenged them when they weren't being properly fulfilled according to the book. I think, looking back now, is there anything that you would change, or do you think that do you feel that the book itself is unrealistic?
I don't think there's any value in policies which are created just to tick a box to say we have policies, because at the whistleblowing policy it says we will make sure that you don't come to any harm. Your job will not be threatened. You will not suffer any consequences or any detriments from raising concerns, because we want you to do this. You've never heard such a pack of lies in your life. It's
just
absolutely
lip service, isn't it?
It is just lip service, yes. And I think when you're in that environment, I don't feel that there was anything that I could have done any differently. And I did think very carefully every time that I did something. And it was only by luck, really, by chance, I progressed one grievance, which was about being passed over for the job, and it was only by chance that I rang ACAS up to ask them what I could do to make it go on, and they told me that the time had more or less run out, which was obviously what the plan was, but I had no idea. Having never put in a grievance, I didn't realise that after 3 months, that's it. It's gone. So they were very good in that they said, right, we'll stop the clock for you. You must go back and say, ACAS have stopped the clock, you have to do something. So then they arranged for an investigation into what had happened. And they got supposedly what was a private investigator in to do this investigation. And she spoke to the two main consultants who were concerned with the bullying and passing me over for the promotion. And she spoke to me. And she actually came clean to me that she actually was a partner at Capsticks, which is a pretty serious conflict of interest, considering that they are the main solicitors that the trusts use. And I think she actually felt really bad when she'd actually spoken to me and heard the whole story. And in actual fact, that investigation didn't go any further at all, because I think she probably turned round to them and said, you haven't got a leg to stand on here. This is absolutely shocking what you have been doing.
Put her through, realistically.
I think one question that people are going to ask themselves is, what happened to the person that you reported, and what happened in the end to you? What is the end of this story?
Well, the person that we reported really stuck her heels in and said, no way, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not changing anything. And totally insisted. She had a lot of power over the medical director at the time, who was quite frankly useless. And he allowed her to just stamp her feet and say that she wasn't doing anything else at all. They arranged an investigation, which was pretty much an inside job, because the number of breast radiologists in the country is actually quite small, and they all know each other extremely well and are sociable together and whatever. And the investigating team were drawn from this group of individuals who the two consultants knew. So of course it was a whitewash, really. The data was just taken up and skewed around and thrown out to make it look like there wasn't really an issue. But we persisted, and we went to NHS England, and we managed to get them to do a proper investigation, which again was involved quite a lot of people, because of course it has to be people who have that knowledge and expertise to be able to look at it, which is very difficult, because you're just getting colleagues investigating colleagues, which never works, does it? But anyhow, that was done, and I think the outcome was that she was told that she would either have to do some further training or she'd have to step down. But she actually managed to stay in her role for nearly 2 years after, before she then stopped doing the clinical work and announced when she would be retiring, because she was of an age where you might retire. So she made sure that she left with all the, appropriate fanfares and parties and all the rest of it. And nowhere along the line was anybody expected to give her name any sort of blackening or tell anybody anything bad about her. She intended to go out with credibility.
So, for our listeners, do you think we'll ever really understand the scale of the consequences of that individual's actions, the deaths, the amount of scans that were missed?
No. I mean, you wouldn't be able to, because this is another way that the trust can control what happens. Because of course, things like medical records, quite a lot of things like imaging, like radiographs, they're disposed of after a period of time because they're not current anymore. So they're actually not relevant. They are something that's only relevant within a short period of time, around the time that the patient's imaged. So that meant that she could rely on the fact that most of the evidence of the cancers that she'd missed, that was written down on the assessment sheets, and the images that went with them, would be thrown away and destroyed after 3 or 5 years.
It's heartbreaking. Wow.
Which is, I imagine, what happened fairly soon. We do know for a start that the patients that were concerned with the audits that my colleague was looking at, those packets, because we were still analogue then, so these were packets which contained the mammogram films and all the assessment sheets and all the details of the patients, they were actually removed from our department and taken to another office in another part of Lancaster, where they were locked up in a cellar in an NHS office, so that nobody could go into the files and look at them or make a record of what was on them. So they were hidden, basically.
So Samantha, can I just ask if there was one thing that you would put in place to improve the situation for whistleblowers within the NHS, what would it be?
I mean, there's so many things that I would want to do to distill it down into one. I mean, the easiest one, the one that springs to mind, especially after hearing your story, Sue, is that I'd like the tribunals to have the power to order an employer to investigate the issue and truly investigate it with an independent body. Because what I find so frustrating is that the employment issues, the tribunal issues, can be such a distraction from what is the real issue here, which is patients are being harmed and patients are losing their lives potentially. And all of this just glosses over that. And you can take your employer to a tribunal. It's difficult. It's an awful process for anyone to go through. You can only get financial compensation at the end of the day. It won't undo everything that's happened. But what happens? What are the consequences for those that have subjected you to it? It's not the first time that I've heard someone that has displayed that kind of behaviour stays on. You have rolling bad apples in the NHS. They go from one trust to the other. What I would like to see is more scrutiny over them and their actions, and for them to face the consequences so that they truly learn from what's happened here and that they won't do this again in the future. And I think if the tribunal could order, there's some ramifications. If you're found to have been a whistleblower and that you face that retaliation, that some change will happen, that they're going to look into it. They'll investigate all of the patient issues so the patients are protected, but you are protecting all of the other employees within that workforce. Because we've talked about there being this systemic issue within the NHS. And there's not one easy way of resolving this and changing it from a system or a culture of blame to one of openness, transparency and learning, which is what it is meant to be. And I think if there was more focus on the consequences of people, then maybe they would stop and think in the first place and think, actually, rather than focusing on the individual, I'm going to focus on the concern that's been raised.
And to close, Sue, as the whistleblower within this situation, what would you want to change about the system? I know you worked with the Trust for a long period of time afterwards and sought to bring about improvements despite the treatment you had. What would you change?
Well, I think what it boils down to is the proper action when when concerns are raised. So I think it's the fact that the people who are hearing concerns are not independent. They're not able to support that person and investigate the claims because they're not independent. They have an agenda, and that is to damp down anything which might arise, which threatens the reputation of the trust or of the board or of senior members of staff or even junior members of staff. I mean, we all know what happened with Lucy Letby, don't we? And she wasn't a senior member of staff, but it was reputational damage that they wanted to avoid. So instead, they said, what are you doing to this poor girl? You know, apologise to her. You can't say these things about her. Because they just wanted to, you know, just brush it under the carpet, basically, and hope it went away and nothing untoward was found. But there's this blinkered attitude that needs to be changed, and there needs to be far more accountability for the way people behave within NHS Trust.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much to the both of you for joining us for this podcast, and thank you to our listeners. You can watch the podcast on YouTube or listen to them on Spotify, and you can also message us to see if there's any guests that you'd like to see or specific sectors, if you'd like to hear more about Sue's story and the NHS more widely, and yeah, just what you'd like to see on the show. So yeah, thank you so much.